in Western culture, Mary Magdalene is a repentant prostitute, not part of Jesus' followers. Is that the real portrayal of this woman, repentant prostitute?
No, that has actually been as you said, a church tradition. It is an old church tradition. What happened is in the years between the beginning of Christianity and the spread of Christianity in Europe, and also moving out from what we would consider to be the biblical world. And so sort of that crossover. And what we found that some of the leaders who are teaching Christianity, they simplify things. And so often what they would do is they would conflate people in the Bible, and they would conflate them with some popular saints, like, for example, a saint named Mary of Egypt, who was a very popular early saint who was known for her asceticism, her fasting out in the desert, etc. And then the reason she was this is because she was a repentant prostitute. And then we also bring in, I was just actually on a dissertation defense last week, and one of the questions asked, it was a global Christianity defense. And so the student was actually talking about the early church in Ethiopia. And what we began to realize as a committee is that this early Ethiopian church was not influenced by the theological teachings of Augustine. And if you think about Augustine, he's the Trinity. Of course, we often think about the theology of the Trinity, but we also think about the theology of original sin and this emphasis on the sinfulness of the sexual act. And with this also this emphasis, and one of the things that Augustine is known for is having trouble putting away. He believed he was being called to be celibate, but he had a lot of trouble in putting away his wife. And one of his famous sayings is, God, give me chastity, but not yet. That's often attributed to him. And so he sort of had this idea of women as these sexual creatures that were scary and men needed to stay away from. And this infiltrated early Christianity, and it infiltrated the way that these early Christians read biblical text. And so women who were actually not sexually sinful people got imbued with these sexually sinful qualities. And Mary Magdalene is one of these. She becomes conflated with the woman with the alabaster jar. She becomes conflated with the sister, with Mary and Martha of Bethany. And by the 7th century, we have most of the Western church has identified Mary Magdalene as this prostitute, this repentant prostitute who anoints the feet of Jesus and who is also the sister of Martha and Lazarus. But I think another part of that tradition too, that we forget now in the modern world, is that the early medieval church did not leave Mary Magdalene as a repentant prostitute. They actually saw her as one of the in crowd of the followers of Jesus. They emphasized the fact that she was at the cross when the men fled away. They emphasized the fact that she was the first one, as John tells us, that she was the first one who encountered the resurrected Christ, and that she was trusted with the gospel to go and give the good news to the apostles that Jesus was risen. And so because of this, the early medieval church called Mary Magdalene the apostle to the apostles, which meant that they saw her as the first preacher of the gospel who was invested with that authority by Jesus himself. And this accounts for the fact that we have a tradition of women preaching with full authority in the early medieval and into the medieval church. They are always more anomalous than men, but it is because of that reputation and that belief that Mary Magdalene was entrusted with the word of God to preach the word of God by Jesus himself. So there's the tradition of the repentant prostitute, but there's also the tradition of the preaching Mary Magdalene, which I think is really important for us to remember today.
El vídeo que acabas de ver es un fragmento de otro más largo. Si quieres verlo completo, haz clic aquí. Te damos las gracias por apoyar el trabajo de CLIE y te invitamos a suscribirte al canal y a seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales para no perderte ninguna de nuestras novedades.